Let's start with racism and the actual history of racism over the last 500 years, because Sola Scriptura is 500 years old. Well, it's 505 years old, I think, this year. So we've had a lot of racial problems in the West in the last 500 years. So tell me about how that's involved with Sola Scriptura.
Sure. So at the age of exploration, which coincided quite closely with the Reformation, right? You've got people traveling around the world, looking for money, starting to sell people. I mean, America, I'll jump ahead a little bit to the thesis of the book, but in America, I think you have almost the distilled version of what Sola Scriptura looks like morally, because it was so Protestant in its founding, right?
Yeah, we are a Protestant
Yeah, it's just a
nation.
very Protestant nation, just as a fact. I mean, not that there wasn't Catholics, but in general, a very Protestant nation, and one that was built out of, the wars of religion and all of that whole mess in
Right,
Europe,
right.
right? And so what do we do? So, let's jump to the slave trade. All right, 1619, we've got slaves sold in the British colonies. Well, this gave the Christians pause there, of course. They're like, well, should we be buying and selling people? It seems like there's, I'm a little skeptical.
I'm a little uncomfortable with this.
I'm a little uncomfortable. What do we? On the other hand, it's making me some money. So is there some way to justify it? Well, from a Catholic perspective, this had been, although certainly there was Catholic slave traders. I mean, yeah, those boats, that was probably stolen from, I think it was St. John the Baptist was the church, or was the boat that got those first slaves were taken from. So it's not that Catholics weren't doing the slave trading, but the official announcements of the church were very much clear, like, you will be excommunicated if you continue in this.
Yeah.
So the official position of the church was unequivocal. No slave trading. This will get you sent to hell. But the Puritans, the Protestants of America, didn't listen to that. So what are we going to do as Protestant Americans? Well, very quickly, they started to relook at Scripture to support this. And so you would look at passages like the curse of Ham, Noah's son. And this has a long tradition in America of an explanation for why we can degrade the African men and women, because they are the descendants of Ham, who was the cursed son of Noah, and therefore they were actually meant by God to be in slavery. And this continued to get more and more elaborate. Like, not only is slavery their lot in life, according to the decree of God, as we can read in Scripture, but it's actually good for them to be in this state of servitude so that they can be drawn closer. Like, at one point, you had a sort of Pharisaical approach to the slaves where, well, are they really human? Like, some people would say, well, do we have to love one another? Like, love your neighbor is sort of like the whole love your neighbor thing. Well, who's my neighbor? And you're like, well, are they really human? Do we have to give them human dignity? So you would argue, well, no, we don't have to, because they are not human. Others said, well, no, they're human, so how are we going to get around that? Well, they're under the curse of Ham. Well, maybe they're not under the curse of Ham, but is there some other scriptural passage that we can use to support the slave trade? And they would go to elaborate issues of, like, government, for example. Well, they're servants, and so they should obey the government and stay in a state of servitude.
Like from St. Paul.
Romans 12, right? So all of these really started to embed very early on in the American experiment a biblical justification for slavery in particular. And then the racism, I feel like, kind of built out of that. Now this, you're like, well, okay, didn't we get over that? But realize that this was no small issue. Like, we fought a war over this. And one of the reasons, a good Protestant historian, by the way, Mark Knoll, who's one of the great historians of Protestantism in America, very explicitly says, and also people like Paul Johnson, that if we did not, on both sides of the Civil War, think that we were on God's side, right? Like, you look at the writings of the evangelical preachers in the South at the time. We are fighting against the satanic, godless attack on Scripture. Like, we are fighting against the enemies of God when we defend slavery. we are fighting on behalf of the Bible and God itself. And so you had this holy war attitude,
Yeah.
which was reflected a little less maybe, but still to some degree from the North. I mean, they're still motivated. It's not like we had a huge atheist population. I mean, everybody's basically Bible believers at the time, right?
Yeah.
And so you would justify the North saying, well, no, we are on the side of God. Love your neighbor. These are human beings. We shouldn't be enslaving them. The motive, the passion, it was not just a war of economics, but a war over interpretation of Scripture. And if you didn't have that scriptural backing, you wouldn't have had the passion and on both sides. And so I believe, I go with Mark Noll. I mean, obviously, people can debate, but I go with Mark Noll that it actually made that situation worse. And certainly, even to this day, implemented you can look at script, you can look at passages, sermons preached in the 1970s on the curse of Ham to support school segregation. It's not like this went away.
Right.
And so, I think that instilled in America this scriptural support for what I see as a grave evil.
And then becomes a self-perpetuating thing, because then the child is taught about this, and becomes their pattern of the way they interpret Scripture. But I suppose that at root, then, what you're saying is that Scripture is not a self-interpreting document. Somebody's got to interpret it, and there's always if we say there's no authority competent to interpret it, a church, namely, then there's always going to be the opportunity to say, well, what the Bible really teaches is transgenderism. What the Bible really teaches is slavery, or what the Bible really, and that will go on endlessly. We can always justify what we want to do using the Bible.
You can always justify anything. And that's the thing. Like, it's not just the fact that we can justify our doctrinal positions. It's that we justify our actions and our attitudes that quite possibly are sinful. That's really where I feel like the rubber hits the road. I mean, we all know that, it doesn't speak for itself. Scripture has to be interpreted. Any writing has to be interpreted. But it is the ethical implications of that really cause a lot of problems. And Luther himself saw this. You read what Luther said about the morality of the church after, and he's like, I can't believe all the immoral people that have resulted from their terrible interpretation of the text. I mean, everybody should be interpreting the Bible the way I am.
Yeah.
Right? He was quite derogatory, but it was the ethical issue that he was mostly concerned about.